When Ahsoka premiered last year on Disney Plus, it was moderately well received. And what I mean by that is kind of the subsect of Star Wars fan base who also like Clone Wars and Rebels seem to like it well enough. But for the general Star Wars fan base who mostly just know the movies, they didn't seem to care too much about it. And this is kind of reflected in the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes with a 64% positive for audiences, which obviously that's not negative score, but still that's just kind of mediocre for something like this. And unfortunately for Disney and Lucasfilm, whenever they make these Star Wars shows, they spend so much money on it. They need the general audiences to kind of be on board with it. And that just wasn't the case. I think a lot of people decided to tune in when it first premiered to check it out, to see what it was about. And a lot of them dropped off because they just didn't care for it. You can see this article right here talking about how it had a 40% completion rate. The audience was down 40% compared to The Mandalorian Season 3. And The Mandalorian Season 3 was already a drop off of audiences compared to the first two seasons of The Mandalorian. So things were not looking too good for it. In fact, things got exacerbated by the fact that a lot of Star Wars properties since Ahsoka, namely The Acolyte, did so poorly. They've lost Star Wars and Lucasfilm a ton of money. And I think Dave Filoni, who's the creator of Ahsoka, would definitely want to continue on the show. And as the chief creative officer over at Lucasfilm, if it were up to him solely, that he would continue it because that's his legacy with Star Wars. He wants to continue on with the character of Ahsoka, even if the audience wasn't there. But right now it's looking like some of the higher ups over at Lucasfilm may disagree with him. And basically season 2 of Ahsoka might just be his last shot to prove that the character is profitable before they decide to axe her entirely. These are according to rumors right here. Ahsoka season 2 is being planned as the show's last in case it's canceled by Disney Plus. And what they mean by that is basically they're writing season 2 to kind of wrap up everything and conclude. So if it doesn't succeed, then they can always just move on to something else. But if it is successful, then maybe they can actually bring it back around and continue on. We saw a similar thing with The Mandalorian Season 2, where Season 2 kind of had a conclusion to it, and that could have been the end of it. But since it was so successful, they decided to basically undo Season 2's ending and then continue it on to a third season and now a movie, which was basically just a fourth season that's kind of being reshaped into a theatrical release. We know the production is set to begin next year, but Daniel Reichman has just shared a very interesting update about how Ahsoka will be handled when it returns to Disney Plus. According to the Scooper, the plan is to make sure the series has a satisfying ending in case it's canceled and doesn't return for a third season. We hadn't expected Filoni to tell this story beyond a couple of seasons anyway, but Disney Plus could always push for more episodes if Ahsoka is a big enough hit. And like I said, we saw that with The Mandalorian. They expected that to be over after season 2, but since it was very successful, they continued it on, and I think they continued it a little bit too much. It probably should have ended after season 1 because, like I said, they basically had to undo what they did in season 2 in order to justify continuing it on. However, the streamer can also pull the plug on any series that doesn't deliver, something we saw earlier this year when The Acolyte was canceled after a single season, leaving behind several major cliffhangers. Ahsoka season 1 was rightly criticized for feeling like half a story, and had that also been scrapped, we'd be heading into Filoni's Star Wars movie with a lot of dangling plot threads for him to tackle. And the movie he's talking about is basically Dave Filoni's kind of like his Avengers team up type thing. All the Star Wars characters from the Disney Plus series, like you got Ahsoka, The Mandalorian, things like that, all coming together to battle Grand Admiral Thrawn. That's at least his vision for things. And it's supposed to take place after Ahsoka season 2. So I think season 2 of Ahsoka is supposed to kind of lead into that. Same with The Mandalorian and Grogu is supposed to kind of lead into that. And then it's going to be the follow-up movie that ties everything up. The Acolyte, the only reason I think The Acolyte got canceled is because Leslie Headland doesn't necessarily have the same pull over at Lucasfilm that Dave Filoni has. I think if Dave Filoni was like in the same position as Leslie Headland, where he didn't have necessarily the name recognition over at Lucasfilm, like let's say hypothetically, if he was a newcomer to the Star Wars franchise and Ahsoka was the first thing he produced for it, I don't think it would have been successful enough in order to justify continuing it along. But since he has a history over at Lucasfilm and producing Star Wars shows, and now he's the chief creative officer with the company. I think that's the only reason why Ahsoka, I think, got a second season right out of the gate. Right now, I think Disney was kind of in a position where, like, well, we can either pay the penalties of canceling our contract, or we can just suck it up and do another season and maybe make something of it, because they saw maybe there was a potential there. So that's why they're willing to continue it on. But right now, basically, according to these rumors right here, this is kind of like the last attempt. If it doesn't work, then they're going to just pull the plug, or at least not continue it along. And they could always justify it by saying, like, no, we wrapped up everything. So they're not going to have that embarrassment of canceling it, because they can always just say that was part of the plan, even though if it was successful, they would definitely be continuing it along. Talking about Ahsoka season 2 earlier this year, lead star Rosario Dawson said, "We've gotten to see from the films now into the show that he's been able to become this Force ghost that brings him back to Anakin, who at the end of the day, when he went and ascended to that space, that's what he became." And I love that she's got that access point. I love that peace has continued, and you get to see it reflected in him, that he gets to enjoy seeing what his legacy has become in a different way. And if Dave Filoni is listening, I hope we get to explore that more, because the road ahead is not going to be easy. And I think that's been one of the really cool things about this story, is a lot of these folks have been able to continue. Dawson added, "I'm very into the sort of intergenerational openness of wisdom being passed on, and I would hope that she'd still be able to access that wisdom." So that's pretty much it. She wants to continue on with it. Filoni clearly wants to continue on with it. It's just a matter of whether Disney and Lucasfilm agrees, because we've seen a lot of their shows in the past not really land with audiences. Apparently, the only thing audiences really want, or at least general audiences, is more or less the Star Wars that they're familiar with, because you have to understand, most Star Wars fans don't necessarily watch all the shows or read the books. They just kind of watch the movies. And if it's not necessarily following the characters that they're familiar with, then they just kind of pass it up. Obi-Wan is probably one of the more successful Star Wars series, but even then, that wasn't good enough for them to justify renewing it for a second season. Ahsoka would have been a follow-up to that as far as recognizable Star Wars characters, but again, that's only because she's recognizable amongst Clone Wars and Rebels fans, but the general Star Wars audiences who only watch the movies, not so much. And I think that's why the viewership of that was significantly lower. Then you can also compare it to The Acolyte, which the viewership was just abysmal, and that's actually crazy considering how much they spent on it. It lost them a ton of money, and I think the first season of Ahsoka in kind also lost them money. This is them thinking, okay, it didn't make money for us. It doesn't really have a demand for it, but Dave Filoni is calling the shots, so he's saying we need to continue on with it. We're going to give him the rope and see what happens with it, whether he's actually going to rise above all of this, or whether it's just going to be enough for him to hang himself with it. I don't think it's necessarily going to be an end to Dave Filoni over at Lucasfilm if this show is a failure, but it's going to be, I think, an end to him having as much leeway as he currently does. Right now, though, it seems like a lot of the leadership over at Lucasfilm doesn't have an idea what they're going to be doing for the future. A lot of this just seems to be people trying to push their passion projects and maybe just throwing something at the wall and see what sticks. But right now, it's looking like the plans that they do have for the future of Star Wars are all up in the air, and they don't know what they're going to be doing. So they're just hoping what they have coming out in the meantime will be successful, so they can find out what plot threads to actually pursue and which ones to axe entirely. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. Do you actually imagine season 2 of Ahsoka will be something that brings in audiences enough to justify renewing it for a third season? Or do you think that they're just going to get rid of it entirely after season 2? Or do you think these rumors are completely bunk and Disney doesn't really have any plan one way or the other? Comment below, let me know. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click that like button and share this video out there, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.